So, hi, everybody. Welcome to the December Alive Academy. And I'm your host, Gretchen Jordan. I'm the Alive Association Manager. We are going to kick it off here for just a few moments, and then I'll be turning it over to Kayla, Victoria, and Abby. Great to have you, and I'm so excited that you're here to learn some great success stories for the field. And I will say earlier in November, I visited a service enterprise in Tampa, Florida, and you could feel the vibe of what a service enterprise can do. So thank you guys for being here today, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to share. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick, and we're just going to go over briefly. Oops, that's not the right share. We have to go back and do this share and do that thing. Okay, so little housekeeping, announcements, presenters, presentation. This is a 60-minute webinar today, and we are recording. All of you as attendees are on mute, but if you have a question, you can use the chat or the Q&A section. We'll all be monitoring that for you, and then we'll place the slide deck, the recording on the live member side in the file archive. And also I'll give you that file, Kayla, so if you want to put it on the Service Enterprise site as well. This is open to anyone. There's no charge to attend this webinar. We're really glad that you're here to learn more about Service Enterprise because it's a really amazing thing. So just a couple of quick announcements. We had our annual meeting last week on December 6th. A lot of really amazing things happened, plus some really important announcements. So I would encourage you to check that out. You can find that on our homepage under the About Us tab, where you can watch the recording or look at the slide deck. Our January Alive Academy is already up for registration, and it's about restorative practices as a tool for volunteer program management. Our Alive member newsletter was sent December 9th, and so check your inbox for that. And I wanted to announce just as of today, we have 2 openings for the Alive Presenter Bootcamp. And you can find out more about that on our website as well. And we just opened our CVA study group, and you can also learn more about that on our website. I'll throw some links in the chat in a little bit so you can pick those up. But right now I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kayla, and I just realized I did not put her photo in the screen, but you see her there on camera. So Kayla is our Service Enterprise Administrator, and I'm going to give back the time I would say glowing her praises and just let her get into the presentation with Abby and Victoria. So please take it away. And thank you, and I'm excited to hear more.
Wonderful. Okay, we should be sharing my screen now. So, Service Enterprise. It is an amazing change management program that we're not only going to give you a little bit of a hints and information about it, but let you hear from organizations that are actually living and breathing and operating as a service enterprise. So I did have an intro slide in there because I couldn't remember if Gretchen did one for me or not. So we're just going to buzz past that. And to help get a sense of how familiar everybody is in the room, can you please use Annotate again and drop on here a stamp near the one that kind of recognizes where you're at. And if there's a couple of them, go for it. Otherwise, you can use the chat at any time to also chime in. So I'll be keeping an eye on that. Gretchen will also be looking at it. If I'm looking over here, that's the chat and y'all's photos. So seeing what things are there. Are people familiar with Service Enterprise? Find the Annotate button. So if you go into your Zoom menu, there should be a pencil that says Annotate underneath it. Go ahead and click that. And then on your left side of your Zoom screen, you should see a fun little option. So you can use stamp. If you check the check mark, that's your stamp one. So you can do hearts, stars, X's, whatever image is a good fit for you. And then just go ahead and click on the Zoom screen. And I see Brianna was at a service enterprise organization in the past and potentially interested in doing it at their new organization. Wonderful. Great. I am seeing some action on here. I want to make sure to give you enough of an overview about service enterprise if you're new, but I also don't want to bore y'all if you're pretty familiar. So it looks like we've got a little bit of variety here. Again, feel free to chime in at any point in the chat. Do feel free to share it with everyone. Alrighty, I'm going to keep us moving forward. So, what is a service enterprise really? Whoops, I didn't hit clear annotation. Let me clear those out because otherwise they are going to be messy. Ooh, Gretchen, I don't think I can clear. I think you may have to as the host. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Okay. So, service enterprise. They are organizations that are fundamentally leveraging volunteers and the skills of those volunteers to achieve their mission. They're using them throughout the organization, having them deeply rooted in the culture and the way that the organization operates and delivers its mission on a day-to-day operational level, strategic plan level, and also as they look at business feasibility and how can they continue to grow and meet the growing needs of the community while maybe resources of financial matters aren't as abundant as they had been in the past. So the Service Enterprise program that Alive Now has the privilege of leading is that change management program. And as one of my early organizations went through it, their volunteer engagement professional said it best. She's like, I like change as long as it's my idea. And it's easy for me to change my piece, but to change the whole org, I need some help. I need people to have my back. And that's what the Service Enterprise program is all about. You have your accountability partner, you're bringing together a cross-functional team from within your organization to sit around the table virtually or a real table to talk through things, to look at things, to solely focus on strategic volunteer engagement during your training sessions. You've got your accountability partner from your training hub that will help support you, get you some resources that you need, connect you with other service enterprise organizations so you can polish their wheel instead of recreating it. It's really looking to see how can we support that organizational change so that you are positioned for the best success you can have. So speaking of success, I am thrilled that we'll highlight some of the service enterprise characteristics, not by me just telling you what they are, which we do have a great handout that I am dropping in the chat so that you've got the link that goes through and tells you what each characteristic is. But what it really is, these characteristics are research backed to be proven to help organizations strategically engage volunteers and to operate as the service enterprise, which statistically, they call it a positive deviant, but I don't think deviant's a great term. It's an outlier. It's the best of the best, the cream of the crop. Insert how many other little sayings that you want, but it's the organizations that truly deliver their mission with strategically engaging volunteers as a viable solution for all of those resources. So I will let the lovely ladies introduce themselves. They're going to share a little bit about their organization. You'll be familiar with the types of organizations that they're at, but to help paint a picture of how they're currently leveraging volunteers at each of their organizations. So to kick it off, Abby, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, well, hello, everyone. My name's Abby Kerstelik. I am with Fort Collins Habitat for Humanity in Fort Collins, Colorado. I am our community engagement director, previously our volunteer manager. So I've been there for about 6.5-ish years. We just received our service enterprise certification this year. in February. So we've been going through the process over the last 2 years. And I know there are like a couple of characteristics that we'll highlight. Kayla, is there anything else you want me specifically to cover, just like an overview of our process, or
Just a
this?
quick overview, because I know if I was thinking about it from a general sense, everybody can picture the picture that we've got on the screen. You use volunteers at the build site. Is that
Yes.
all the locations that you're using them, or where else are you using them at? Kind of a nice little overview.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I forgot that piece of it that you said beforehand. So obviously, like she said, we've got a pretty established volunteer component to our organization on the construction site. Our habitat also has a restore. So similar to other habitats that have restores, we have a volunteer program within that. So those are our more traditional ways, but we've been able to engage volunteers to help with our fundraising. I'll talk a little bit more about that in one of the characteristics that we highlight. And we've had volunteers kind of help us in different administrative supports as well. I think Service Enterprise has been really helpful in helping us think through ways that we can do that a little bit more strategically, because we already kind of had an established path for volunteers. We definitely improved a lot of our processes, and I'll talk more about that later, but I think it's been cool to kind of explore other administrative ways that we can have volunteers deepen their engagement with our organization.
Wonderful. Let me get us to the next slide. Introducing Victoria.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Victoria Grosella. I'm the Vice President of Marketing Community Engagement at United Way of Greater New Bedford, which is located on the south coast of Massachusetts. So we have been a service enterprise since 2016, I believe is the year. We were approached by Mass Service Alliance, who I know is on this call as well. They asked us to partner with them on bringing this initiative to Massachusetts, and if we would serve as a local hub for service enterprise, which would mean that we would be pulling partners in to participate in the project, in the process, and getting them certified as service enterprises. So my first thing was, of course, well, we can't bring others into it unless we go through it ourselves. So that way I can speak from experience. And honestly, it was one of the best things that we could do. It made us really set aside time to focus on volunteerism. As United Ways, volunteerism is a big pillar of what we do, but actually sitting still and saying, okay, well, what policies do we have in place for volunteers? What if somebody gets hurt? Like, what do we do then? And so this really made us stop and think, okay, we didn't have any of that in place before. And so now we do. And then as serving as a coach for Service Enterprise, what's been really great for me is seeing what other people are doing and actually taking that back and implementing it in our own work at United Way, and then using those pieces that I'm finding in other organizations that have been helpful to help other organizations that we're coaching. It's definitely opened our eyes to a lot of things we were not doing well as a United Way and with our volunteers. So I can't speak highly enough about how valuable this program is and really highlighting what you can be doing better than you already are.
Wonderful. And what I love, and we were able to hear from both of you, is it's beyond the basic. Everybody thinks habitat, build, or restore. They easily can picture that, and you blew past that boundary. And Victoria, coming from a United Way that was a volunteer center, I hear you. We were amazing at pushing volunteers out into the community, but Service Enterprise gave us the privilege of saying, "Whoa, we need to cherry pick some of these volunteers to help us and to build our capacity so we can put more volunteers out in the community." So excited to hear more as we dive into this. I did want to quick introduce the first domain. So establishing the foundation. And that's really about making sure that those fundamental foundation pieces are in place for your organization to leverage volunteers and to strategically engage them. We're first going to hear about leadership involvement. And that's when executive and board leaders really demonstrate through their actions, not just like, yeah, you got my support, but through their actions, a commitment to community involvement and engaging volunteers as key strategy to really make that organization's mission come to reality. So let's go ahead and hear from Abby.
Yeah, so I think the characteristic that I'll highlight is leadership involvement, like Kayla said. when we did our like kind of pre-certification survey, this was the highest score that we had with our characteristic. We already had quite a bit of leadership buy-in. And I think a lot of it is that like our executive director has a really strong passion for Habitat and also started with Habitat as a volunteer. So she kind of understands that pipeline of getting volunteers engaged and involved. And so that was really cool to see that we already had a lot of the good bones of that appreciation and kind of belief in volunteer engagement. I think there's still always room for growth though. And I think a lot of what we saw, or a lot of at least what I saw since we've been certified, is a deeper understanding of what it takes to effectively engage volunteers. I think there was a lot of trust in my abilities as a volunteer manager, but understanding really that volunteer engagement is about more than just communicating where someone needs to be and saying thank you as they're leaving. You know, it really does take a lot of structure and planning and strategic thought behind it. I think I watched everyone on our service enterprise team really start to understand a little bit more of the mechanics of it. And so I think it was helpful when we started delegating things for volunteers, so it didn't all just fall to me. It was helpful for them to kind of understand where they could kind of plug in and effectively engage volunteers and just kind of deepen that engagement. The second bullet point too, just deeper buy-in of engagement, finding creative opportunities to engage. I think one of the coolest things that I saw, so we are currently doing a legacy campaign for making asks for folks to consider putting Habitat in their will. And we had a staff member who had transitioned off but was still engaged as a volunteer with our organization. And she had been a staff member for many years and had a lot of really deep relationships with quite a few of our key volunteers. And so when we were thinking about how we wanted to approach those asks, it was really cool for our development team to think about engaging her as a volunteer. We knew that she had that skill and we knew that she had those relationships, and that's really what she loves to be utilized for. She said that as she was leaving as a staff member, that she still wanted to be engaged in that way. So that was a cool way for us to just think creatively outside the box. And I think the coolest thing about Service Enterprise is it talks about leveraging volunteers to free up your staff to continue doing what they do best. And so it freed up our development team's time to continue building new relationships or make asks of relationships that they had that were really deep. And so that was a cool example of something recent that we were able to do. And then leadership team involvement. I think there's been a lot more of like allowing a seat for volunteer engagement at leadership tables. So I'm on our leadership team, which is really great because I can provide that volunteer kind of lens to discussions that we're having, or if we're having kind of strategic discussions, I can make sure that volunteers are part of that conversation. So I think that that's really important too. So that's what we've seen since certification. So advice that I would have for this characteristic and where I learned the most, I would say the biggest thing is just being able to advocate for yourself and understanding that culture change takes time. Even with the buy-in and belief that we had to how core and central volunteers were to our organization, it took a lot of conversations with my supervisors and our leadership to go through the service enterprise training. It took a lot of just a lot of conversations and convincing. And so just, really staying strong to what you think is going to be useful. I would really advocate for this program. It was a great way for us to go through that change management process, and knowing it is a financial investment, but that it's one very much worth making. So that would be my advice, is just to hold steady to it. If you find other opportunities to sell the wins of other organizations that your organization is connected to or really respects, just finding those opportunities to plug it and just keep it kind of front of your team's mind. And then understanding the goals and motivations and just really connecting the dots to help them see how volunteers will help them get there. I think that's been the biggest way that our leadership has stayed engaged. The Bequest Ask is a great example of them going, oh, we know this person, we have this goal of having this many bequests. We know this person will help us get there because they're really deeply committed. So being able to understand that and see those things and sell it is helpful as well. And then the other must-haves and do's for success. We call it a stump speech at our organization. I guess elevator pitch is maybe a better term for it because I don't know the origins of stump speech, but just a really clear way that you want to sell, either if it's service enterprise or pitching volunteer engagement, just really making sure that you are clear on the wins of it and the whys of why you see the value in it. The more you have that's concise, the easier it will be to kind of sell and repeat yourself if you have to do that. Because I know I had to have a lot of one-on-one conversations and repeat myself quite a bit. The other part, one-on-one check-ins and meetings, just being present with people and being available to answer questions. I know if you really believe in something, it can be hard if people don't also automatically see the value in it, but just being patient and willing to stay in it and having those conversations with people, oftentimes you're able to kind of get to the root of people's concerns or their questions if it's one-on-one versus in a large meeting. So just being willing to do that. Presence in department meetings and just regular interactions with staff. I think we've got a lot of great staff members who have volunteer engagement on their minds, but because it is central to my job, being in those spaces helps me keep it top of mind for them, just in case it slips, or if they just maybe haven't considered volunteer engagement as part of a process or a plan for something that they're wanting to do. So just being there is really helpful. And then the other thing I've learned is just making things easy and flexible for people. Again, if volunteer engagement is part of their job, but not the number one part of their job, it's our job as volunteer engagement professionals to keep them connected to it. And so finding ways to meet people where they're at and providing opportunity to engage volunteers and just making it easy and fun for people, I've found is the best way to make sure that leadership stays engaged and involved with it.
Sorry, I lost my mute. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Next, we are going to hear from Victoria about planning, and that's the thoughtful, comprehensive preparations for volunteer and community engagement based on those established principles and practices of effective management.
Thanks, Kayla. Just bear with me, I'm starting to lose my voice, so I can hear it kind of cutting in and out. So just to forewarn, if you need me to repeat something, please let us know. So we do two different kinds of planning. We have large scale planning for events, and then we have maybe shorter term things in our office that we're planning for. So one of the things that we have committed to through the service enterprise process, it's something we started back in 2016 when we went through certification, was having weekly, well, at our weekly staff meeting, we would have these weekly check-ins about volunteers. What are our needs like in the short term? And then what are our needs in the longer term? What do we need done in the office this week? Whether right now, I mean, my goddaughter is here folding t-shirts. So she is here on a short term, you know, we needed this done, it's being done, so she's taking care of it. But then we have a volunteer who has been volunteering for our Women United program, and she's been here for a solid year. She comes in once a week and does that. So we're always thinking like what needs to be done. We're trying to get ahead of it so that way it doesn't sneak up on us and it's the day before we need something done and it's, oh shoot, who are we calling in for tomorrow? I'm sure we have all been there. And so now we are trying to be more proactive in that and thinking ahead. And so our staff meetings really have become that place where we're talking about it. So I can't encourage that enough, that, you know, those 5 minutes you spend at a staff meeting, whether it's weekly or monthly, are going to help you get ahead and help you think about, you know, what else do we need help with? It also makes you stop and say, well, okay, well, maybe this isn't worth my time, but maybe I could have somebody else come in and support me on that. And so that way I can do something else that only I can do. And so we have to start changing that conversation and having us think differently about our roles. And that's something that Service Enterprise definitely taught us through the whole process. At these weekly meetings, we're also talking about large scale volunteer opportunities. So we do a couple really large ones, usually during Thanksgiving and then in the spring, where we're gathering about 200 volunteers at a time to help package meals. So what for that, planning is a little bit different. We do have committees that come in and help with that. They come in, committees also help with event planning for our fundraisers. But for those two large scale projects, the way we started them was listening to the needs in our community. So it was, what is it that is facing our community? Around here, it's food insecurity, which I'm sure a lot of people are hearing this more and more. And so we said, let's develop some kind of volunteer program where we can engage people of all ages around the topic of food insecurity. So that's exactly what we did, was we looked at the Thanksgiving time and then also spring school vacation week in the spring. And we wanted to design something that let young kids come in and volunteer. So that's the one thing in our area that was not happening. There is no other organization that engages youth. And both of these projects are built around, let's get the kids involved. You know, we have kids as young as 2 and 3 coming to help with these, because all they do is walk around and they take the food and they put it in the bag and they feel great. And it's exposing volunteers at a young age that it's a great opportunity to learn, to get involved with your community and to give back. So the younger we can get that into people's heads, the better, right? So that's what you need to look at when you're looking at the large scale planning, is how are we benefiting the community, but also how, like, who are we engaging? And for us, it was definitely getting more kids involved and people doing things as families. It's so important that they're doing that. And so my advice is, think about in your community what you could be doing, you know, whether it's around food or maybe it's around literacy. Think about what that big need is in your community and how you could make something more large scale. So my advice is, again, you know, find what's going to work for you. What time of the year is best? You know, we do really well around Thanksgiving and food because everybody is looking to give back at that time. So we host a ton of food drives and people are giving tons of food because it's the holidays and they want to give back. We do it in the spring because more people have time in the spring. During the fall, like, we notice that people are very busy still. In the spring, they're not as busy, so we are getting more people out volunteering. So you have to find what's right for your community, and what's right for your organization. You know, you don't want to be trying to have a big volunteer event at the same time you're trying to run a fundraiser. You'll be ripping your hair out in 10 minutes. So you have to find what's going to work best for you and your community, of course. And you want to make sure that you're able to engage on a large scale too. You know, you want to make sure you're planning way ahead, and not throwing something together in an hour that's going to bring out 200 people. You're probably not going to have as much success if you start planning. You know, we plan 2 to 3 months ahead of time for these kind of things. And you want to make sure everybody at your organization is supportive. I mean, you know, Abby just talked about leadership buy-in, and it's so important. You know, our leadership here at United Way is all about volunteerism. We have volunteers here all the time, like I say, helping everyone at every level, and we rely strongly on them. But, you know, letting your team know, like, hey, we're doing this volunteer opportunity. Who do you know that maybe you can start recruiting? And it really becomes a whole team effort. And so the planning of who's taking on which volunteer, like who's leading which part of the volunteer effort, is really helpful. So I always say that's key for success, is making sure your whole team is buying into it and then taking a piece of ownership of it.
I need to do a better job of sensing when y'all are wrapping up. Sorry about that. I have to scramble for the mute key. Alrighty. So we've heard a couple about those. Now we're going to lean into best practices and volunteer engagement. So all ya volunteer engagement professionals are probably like, "Ooh, I know these. These we're familiar with." One of the great things that I love about Service Enterprise is not only do we help on the organization change management piece, but we also can help bring the volunteer engagement training program to organizations that are going through the process. So that's another, you know, if you're like, we need some help in this basic category, we bring the basics to you. So first, we're going to hear a little bit about training. So training, education, skill development, as well as what organizational parameters and boundaries for that knowledge. Those are critical to ensure volunteers and staff are really equipped to perform the work that we ask of them, and that they can work together effectively, together with volunteers and with our staff. So, Abby, I will let you kick off with that.
Yes. So on the flip side of leadership involvement, training was our lowest score pre-certification. So we had a lot of growth in this area. I think one interesting piece about Habitat, if you aren't as familiar with it or haven't volunteered with us before, is that because we have lots of different volunteer opportunities, all of the training needs, of course, are so different. So for example, because we engage a lot of group and new, like, episodic volunteers on our construction site, most of the training is on the job. We don't really require a whole lot ahead of time, because most times folks are just coming out for one day. Whereas our restore, we require an orientation so they can get a tour of the store and get familiar with it, with the idea that they're going to be coming back for several shifts. So our training for volunteers was varied, and I do think that that was a strength. I just think that what we had seen pre-certification was just that there were better opportunities to make those trainings engaging. The biggest aha we had was that we didn't have training set in place for staff who worked with volunteers. I will truly never forget when we were going through our debrief and our certification facilitator asked us like, oh, like what training do you do for staff? And we just crickets. We were like, oh, that would be, you know, a great place to start. And so that's good to know, Kayla, that that's a common aha.
Abby, that's funny because that's exactly what we did is we developed the training for our volunteers and then said, wait a minute, we don't even do this for staff.
I know it was I was like, how have I never thought of this? It was crazy, but it was a really great and important aha. And so that was arguably, I think, the biggest area of growth we've had in certification. We did a monthly training with our resource staff that really walked them through, like, this is how we recruit volunteers. This is why we engage volunteers. Here's how you can effectively train volunteers. And it was helpful for a couple of reasons. One, I think it was just engaging for the resource staff to get a little bit more of like a why for working with volunteers. And two, it was really helpful for clarifying roles, because what was happening before the trainings was people were coming to me for things that they maybe didn't necessarily need to be coming to me for. And so it was really helpful to clarify, like for recruitment, for example, Abby manages this piece of it, but here's where you as the resource staff support us in this effort. And same for training of, you know, Abby gets them onboarded and ready to go. And our staff, you know, you are responsible if someone comes to your department. Kimberly, I'm seeing your question in the chat. We did not have resistance. We didn't have too much resistance from staff. And I think it's because of the way that we structured our trainings, which I'll talk a little bit about in our like the advice slide things. I think because we kept it pretty short and sweet, people were a little bit more willing to engage because we kind of met them where they were. So for advice that I would say, advice in failing forward, bringing in volunteers to help where you can. One really cool thing that happened as we were developing the trainings for our resource staff was that we had a volunteer truly wander into the doors of our restore who had curriculum design experience. And so she helped provide us with some different strategies for engaging people in just fun and exciting ways. She'll meet with me on occasion when I'm getting ready to do another training just to give me ideas on different ways that I can do it to keep it engaging. And she's been really helpful for our construction site, working with our regular volunteers to help with on-the-job training, especially for safety, has been really helpful just because they're on site so much. They can help provide an extra step for training for new volunteers. Utilizing lesson planning resources to help develop training. I think that was something that was really helpful for me, and especially keeping learning styles in mind. I think I tried to do something different for all of our restore trainings just so people didn't feel like it was going to be the same thing every time. And I think that's kind of what helped hopefully avoid some resistance to it, because they knew that they were at least going to get to talk to each other, or get up and move around. It wasn't just going to be me talking at them for a long period of time. And then another piece of advice I would have is ask people what they want to learn, because that was really illuminating for me, especially after we did our training series with the restore staff. To ask them where they maybe needed some additional support was helpful for me to determine needs moving forward. I think the other piece of it too that I forgot to mention earlier, one really cool thing that we implemented after certification was that we started including volunteer engagement with our staff culture training for new staff members. So when staff members were getting onboarded, we have a training around, you know, our values as an organization, and we have volunteer engagement as part of that. Of this is why we engage volunteers, and this is why it's really important to our organization. The Denver Habitat affiliate had a really great way of phrasing it, of even if we could do what we do without volunteers, we wouldn't, because it's important for us to have that community engagement. And so just really instilling that in our new staff members as they're coming on board has been really helpful for them to kind of get the why behind volunteer engagement and have that expectation set for them as they're coming in. For things that I would suggest for success, leadership buy-in, I think, was really important. I think part of the reason, Kimberly, to your point, why we didn't have a lot of resistance to training, especially at the restore, was that our manager was so on board with it, and having his support was really helpful. So I think just having people understand, you know, when your team knows how to work with volunteers, it's a better experience for everyone. I think that was really important for me and really helpful for us implementing it. I would also say just being mindful of your audience. I had mentioned the timing for the Restore one was really important for me. I know I had tried to implement a training before we did the training series, and I vividly remember I like stood up during our Restore staff meeting, like we touch base with everyone every morning, and I stood up and tried to do this really quick training presentation, and it did not go well. No one was paying attention. No one really cared. No one really understood what I was doing. And so taking a step back for the training series and going, okay, if we really want people to retain this, we're going to have it in a different place from when we do this. It's going to be different from our daily meetings, and it's going to be 20 to 30 minutes. So it's short and sweet so people aren't sitting for a long time. Just kind of taking those things into consideration. It went much better once we started doing them because it just felt different for people and they understood the purpose a little bit more. So just keeping those things in mind. I know when we did this for our construction team too, they also don't like to sit still for too long. So we did a lot of this a little bit more abridged for them. So just kind of finding what your staff needs are and just kind of keeping that in mind was what we took away from it. And that was really helpful for us when we were developing them.
And I think you have caught up with all of the questions. You were doing a great job of managing both. I was impressed, Abby. Alrighty, so impact and outcomes, our final domain that we're going to dive into. And we're going to start off with communication. Communication takes many forms. It operates through a wide and diverse array of channels that I swear are changing on a daily basis. That is my commentary added in, not official. But we need to make sure to be both in the formal and informal side of things, leveraging print, social media, and all the many more that we are getting exposed to on a daily basis to inform our external and internal partners. So, Victoria, I'll have you share that for us.
Absolutely. So half of my job is marketing and the other half is community engagement. And they really go very well together, honestly, because we are always communicating out with the public to let them know what we're doing. So on the screen, you can see some of the ways that we're engaging people, whether it's through social media, email, direct mailings, our annual report. There's always ways that people can find out what we're doing. Come the new year, we'll be launching a e-newsletter, which we have not done in many years, but got a lot of feedback that people wanted to read more. They wanted to know more about what we were doing. And while it was great that they were, seeing the pictures, they wanted to hear more. And so we will be doing more of that come the new year. That is our plan. But I can't stress enough how important it is to have clear and consistent communication. So if you are not already doing a ton of social media, you need to be out there. You need to be on different platforms because with each platform, you're going to find a different demographic of folks that you're reaching, whether it's the youth who are more on the Instagram side, maybe some older adults that are on Facebook. You're going to find that you're going to hit different networks with the posts. And that's what you want to be doing, is really spreading that word as far as you can. You want to be posting frequently, whether it's just about a program that you're running, or it's a volunteer spotlight, or it's at a volunteer event. You want to get those out. And what's so important is when I mentioned our large scale volunteer days before, when we post those photos, we get so much engagement. They're sharing the photos, they're commenting on them. They're, friends are saying, hey, I see you in that photo. What were you doing? And so they're now spreading the word. And so the more you can do things like that, the better. You want to be not only telling your story, but having other people tell your story for you. Every time a volunteer walks through that door is your opportunity to have a new ambassador for your organization. And I can't stress that enough. You want to make sure that they are having a great experience at your organization. And when they leave, they tell 3 more people about it. You want that to happen. You want them to go home and post it on social media. And then you as the organization then go and share their post. So that way it's getting out far and wide. It's just so important. One of the other things that we actually just did, so we have our annual report that comes out every October. I will not lie, it was very taxing on our staff. We sent out about 500 annual reports and we hand wrote notes to go with every single one. So we did engage volunteers to help us with some of those. But if we personally knew somebody that was getting an annual report, we took that. So if we had volunteers that were getting the reports, I took those letters. And I wrote my thank you saying, great seeing you in October at our Day of Caring. Can't wait to see you at the next event. We've gotten so much great feedback that they appreciated that we took the time to write those hand notes. And again, it was taxing on our time, on our staff, on our volunteers, but so appreciated in the end. So as much as it drove us nuts and the mailing was a nightmare, we will absolutely be doing that again at least one more time per year, in addition to our annual report that comes out, just because it made people say, wait a minute, they are real people that are working there. They're not just a machine. They want to see that. They want to see that we're communicating with them, and that they're not just a number to us at the end of the day, that they are really valued and part of our organization. So Kayla, if you want to go to the next one. So my advice is, of course, have some kind of communication plan in place. Again, if you're not using social media often, you need to be doing that, because that's the easiest way to get to your supporters. You need to have different modes and platforms, of course, to get to different demographics, like I mentioned earlier. And that you want to make sure that your staff is also taking the time to share and like those posts that they're putting out there. Every one of my staff members on our admin team, anytime we post something, they'll go and share it. And I'm sure people get annoyed because they're friends with all of us, and so they're seeing it 6 times, but you know what? They see it 6 times and they're like, oh, you know what? They are doing something really cool. So we should be paying more attention to them. And so just keep that in mind. Social media is also really important because it is a two-way communication. It's us telling our story, but then it's people coming back and saying, hey, had a great time at that event. Or they're saying, hey, would love to know how to get more involved because I'm really impressed by what you're doing. So it is opening those communication channels between you and donors, you and potential donors, you and volunteers. It's opening those out. And you always want to make sure that you are sprinkling in those calls to action, whether it's to give, whether it's to come volunteer at the next event. Maybe you're hosting, like right now, toy drives are what I'm knee deep in, and maybe it's asking them to give a toy. So you want to make sure there's those calls to action, and that you're constantly connecting with your audiences. Any age, giving people more opportunities just to have an opportunity and an experience with you.
Wonderful. So we're going to circle back to impact and outcomes. And I know tracking and evaluation, it is sometimes a lovely one, sometimes a cringy one for people. So tracking and evaluation assesses the degree to which an organization is monitoring the progress towards institutional goals. And let's do the performance of volunteers, staff, and partners together to make that happen. So let's go back to Victoria.
So tracking and evaluation was probably the one we did the worst on, if I'm remembering correctly. It has been quite a while since we've done this. We weren't doing any of it until we went through Service Enterprise. It was the time we stopped and we said, wait, we should be asking people for feedback to enhance our programming. We need to be hearing what they're saying so we can make effective changes. We need to be talking to our volunteers that are coming into our office and finding out why they continue to come back and how we can get other people to want to do the same thing they're doing. So, and then the other piece is too, so as a United Way, we have to do this big survey at the end of our fiscal year every year as part of our recertification as a United Way. And we need to provide a number of how many volunteers volunteer and how many hours and then how much that is valued. We made that up for years. It was well before me, but they definitely were making that up because we did not track anything. And it sounds so ridiculous as a United Way because we are all about volunteerism. We're all about the numbers of how many people are coming to volunteer with us. So for us to not even know how many volunteers we had blew my mind when I started really thinking about it when we went through this process. So now we are doing that. Anytime somebody comes into the office to volunteer, there's a clipboard at the doorway where they sign in before they even make it into the office saying, I'm here at this time, I check out at this time. We have another volunteer that will come in at the end of the month and enter all those into a spreadsheet. We also have an online database called Volunteer South Coast, which is, some of you might be familiar with Get Connected, which is an online volunteer database matching system. So we do have that. So volunteers that come to our larger skills event, they check in and out on that, and it's automatically getting their hours in, and then we can pull a report and add it to what we already have. So at the end of the year, we're not making up those numbers. We know that's how many people came in. We know how many hours they're volunteering with us. And that's so important that we know that. And then, of course, going back to communication, we blast that from the mountaintops. We say, here's how many people are coming to volunteer with us. We must be doing something right if we're recruiting this many people, they're staying involved with us. So I can't say enough about how important it is to track your hours, because it also helps, now we weave it into most of the grants that we write, that we are bringing in this many volunteers for this many hours, so we can show that, we're making all of our programming work well with volunteers. We want them to know that it's not just our staff that's important in doing the work, it's the volunteers are a huge piece of our work. And again, we started surveying people. We sat down with our regular volunteers and say, hey, what do you like? What do you not like? We also say to them, here's what you could be doing differently. We treat them like staff in a way. They're in here just like we are. They are here for the mission. They're here for the work. And so we want to make sure that they're doing what we need them to do, but also, to know that they're important to us at the end of the day. That is important to us, that they know that that's it. We do annual reviews with our volunteers, so that way, they know how things are going, and we can hear from them, because we want to know if there's something we're not doing right. We also foster a workplace where, we all have this open door policy. Like, if you ever need to talk, whether you're staff, volunteer, just walking by, we will stop and talk to you. And that way we can get feedback constantly. And so all the volunteers know that they can come talk to any one of us at any given point. If you want to move forward now. And I think this first one is the right thing. Do not ask for this feedback if you don't plan on ever using it. I mean, that's just a waste of your time. It's a waste of your volunteers' time. But in all honesty, it's only going to help you improve. If we're getting at our Hunger Heroes event, if we're getting that they don't feel that their 4-year-old should be there because it didn't feel like it was a good event for them, we need to either reevaluate how they're letting people come that young, or we would need to figure out, well, how can we make this a better environment for them to be there? We need to hear that feedback for us to change. And so I feel like every organization should do this something similar, that you're asking for feedback and then you're following that feedback to enhance your programming. And you want to make sure that they can give you feedback in multiple ways, whether it's through an online survey where they can be anonymous. Most people want to be anonymous on surveys, so that way they can be more honest with you. That's what we find, is they want to be honest, but they don't want to tell you to your face. They want to be able to hide behind that. And I understand that, because I'm the same way. We want to make sure that they can call us at any point. They can stop by and talk to us. We want that open door policy. You want people to feel like they can come to you and talk to you like you're their best friend. You want to have those great relationships with people. And you want to make sure that, all of your goals for volunteering align with your mission. Ours very much is mobilizing people, partnerships, and resources. And volunteers are all part of that. It's their time is the resources. Their skills are just incredible to have at different levels of the organization. And we really wouldn't operate as well as we do without having them. And that's why, we've been able to, through Service Enterprise, to really stop and think more about, well, how can we be recognizing volunteers, because we weren't doing a good job before. And now we know how more important they are in our everyday work. And so this gave us the chance to just stop and think about it, and not just take for granted that they're here.
Wonderful. Well, that wraps up our spotlights from those two, and I'll say another round of thanks now, and even as we close this out. I appreciate the two of you sharing, because those inspiring stories, and here's the practical, tangible things, that's what Service Enterprise is all about. It's not that we have these 10-yard lines that you're trying to make it to. It's, can we make 1 yard of progress? Can we make 2 yards? Well, maybe we need to evaluate, we're going back up a yard. It's moving back and forth down the football field. And if you know me, sports analogies aren't my best, but my son and I were talking about it recently, and I was like, ooh, I love this one. So I did want to circle back. The big part of Service Enterprise, we've got research. I'm happy to share it with you, but we know it helps organizations better engage volunteers. They engage more volunteers, and most of them get more hours from volunteers, unless it is one of those situations where they're also like, you know what, this is not a good return on our time, because that's a big piece of it. If you're not getting a strong return as an organization by leveraging volunteers in that capacity, we encourage you to think about stopping and leverage them in better ways. We know that organizations that operate as a service enterprise are better managed and operate at almost half the median budget, because volunteers are expanding their budget. They're able to have a budget twice the size of their cash budget because they're getting such great and valuable resources from their volunteers. The last one is one I really love is we know for every dollar invested in strategic volunteer engagement, not just volunteer engagement willy-nilly, but strategic, can expect a $3 to $6 return, and we help our organizations calculate that. So keep in mind, Service Enterprise is all about flexibility and doing what's right for your organization. What's going to make the most impact? Diagnostic and Debrief helps you figure that out. It also creates a platform and opportunity for you to discuss and explore with your cross-functional team what is good for your organization. How are you going to proceed? And it lets you choose what's best for the organization. We only require 6, as you have to do these characteristics for sure, because we know they're fundamental to make your organization operate as a service enterprise. But then you get to select the other 3 based on your organization. So if you're interested in learning about how to join the Service Enterprise family, we've got amazing hubs that are training and doing implementation across the country that I would be happy to connect you with. But in mind of Service Enterprise, continuous improvement and polishing each other's wheels is what it's all about. So we're pulling together our service enterprises for national community of practice, doing some trainings that are specific to them, helping them figure out how to put it in their funding request. And as a little token of appreciation to Abby, when I was talking with her, right sizing her volunteer handbook for role types is still on her to-do list. So if anyone has great words of wisdom, ideas, samples they want to send her way, Abby, I'm going to have you drop your email in the chat. But if you share with her, I bet you she'll share back with you. So we're all about polishing each other's wheels and never recreating it if we don't have to. I do want to have time for questions, and I know some are coming through the chat. Are there any other questions that you have for the amazing Victoria, Abby, or by default, I can help answer if they can't? And Gretchen, I think you have it so that they can come off mute at this point.
If they'd like to, they could just indicate in the chat and I'll be happy to unmute them.
Wonderful. I also want to give a shout out. We've got Liesl Hacker on the call and Beth Steinhorn, who are 2 amazing Service Enterprise trainers. So they are great ones to reach out to if you have questions also. Well, I'll keep us moving forward if you don't have questions. So if you're ready to even explore beginning your Service Enterprise journey, you're welcome to connect with me and I will get you connected with the Service Enterprise Training and Implementation Hub that will be able to really help your organization transform the way you engage volunteers, connect with your community, and really deliver your mission. So a huge thank you again to Abby and Victoria. It was funny, as I was talking to Victoria this morning, she is like knee deep in drives, and I can understand and appreciate where you're at with that, because having been with the United Way, it is a month of giving and it is a tiring month at that. So thank you both very much for your time, your support. Abby, I hope y'all continue to have great weather in Colorado so the build season can wrap up nicely. But otherwise, I will leave it open for questions for a couple minutes, and then we will shut down the webinar.
I'll go ahead and take the screen back and just have a few quick things here about, I wouldn't be a good professional if I didn't encourage you to consider joining Alive as a member. Great goal for the new year. If you've got some budget funds to use before the end of the year, there's a little bit of information about that and all sorts of great benefits and our contact information. It certainly can leave it here open for about 5 minutes for questions. And I will say, as I've learned more about Service Enterprise, I think this is one of those, Homer Simpson moments, like, dope. I mean, why haven't we thought of this before, right? This is the best thing ever. So I guess maybe you could each just say, you know, one thing that surprised you going through this process that, you know, now you're here on the other side. And what did you see happening that you had no idea that would happen? Like, did you get a raise? Did you get a seat at the table? Do people actually like, oh, let's ask Abby before we do this thing with volunteers? Or let's see what Victoria thinks. I'm hoping you'll say yes.
I mean, I've always been kind of the go-to anyway. But I think, I'm more of the go-to now with hey, do you think a volunteer would be willing to help on this? I think that's a question I actually get frequently is like, we don't have time in the day to get this done this week, but it has to be done by Friday. Do you know anybody that might be willing and able to come help with this? So I do get that a lot more now. Overall, I can't say enough about how important this process was for us. Going through Service Enterprise certification, recertification, and now we're on to our next recertification. It is so important. It taught us so much that we just didn't realize we weren't doing. I think for us, those were our biggest aha moments was, well, why aren't we doing this? I said that earlier, like, why weren't we tracking anybody's hours? Why didn't we have an intake form? Like, they're silly little things, but when you add them all together, it's like, wow, what were we doing before? There's just so many better practices that we learned from this. And like I said, as being a coach as well, it's helped me teach others, that are going through the process, how they can make simple changes to make a big impact for them.
Thanks, Victoria.
I think you said it so well, Victoria. I think it was a great way, you don't know what you don't know. And I think it was a really good way for us to see some really like low-hanging fruit that we could make changes for, as well as some opportunities for, longer term, like, oh, we can look to doing that in the future. That will really help us down the line. I also think it was cool to one of the things we talked about during our training was celebrating your wins. And so that was really neat too, to be able to celebrate what we already do very well with volunteer engagement. I think that the way the diagnostic works, it helps you celebrate that while also seeing your opportunities for growth, which I always appreciate. I think the biggest thing that I learned was just how important having processes are and just making sure that they're really clear to people. I think we used to joke that our Restore was a choose your own adventure volunteer experience, which if you are a very flexible person, that is great. But that's not a lot of volunteers. A lot of volunteers really like having structure and a plan. And so I think that was the most transformative for our Restore team, is really just getting those processes in place and having it just be a smoother process for people, which was really impactful for us.
I will say it's been over a decade since I helped train and take my organization through at the same time. Not that I would recommend it. I highly tell hubs, if you're wanting to be a hub, lean in, go through the process, then become a hub. Because it's much easier when you're only playing one role with an organization. But I will say it again is a lot of times people going, oh, things that the volunteer engagement professional is saying regularly to the whole organization, but you're inside the organization. And when that outsider says it, it just gets heard differently. Even though I was the outsider for most of our community, it was heard differently when I had somebody come and say it to my organization instead of me saying it. So it helps amplify your voice and change the perspective of a lot of individuals in your organization and the whole organization culture.
Love it. Well, we are headed up on the hour, so I will end the webinar there. And if you do have any other questions, you can put them in the chat and Kayla can certainly pick them up. You can also see more on our website. And again, I just want to thank Abby and Victoria for sharing their energy and enthusiasm, which is so exciting. And thank you, Kayla, for putting this webinar together, and wishing everybody happy holiday season. And we will see you at next month's Alive Academy. Have a great day.